When I was a lot younger, one of the first times I was allowed to stay home alone, I heard a noise coming from my bedroom, so I went to check it out, and right as I walked in the room, the TV shut off. I was fairly frightened because I was a young dumbass who didn't know how to think about things critically, so I came to the conclusion that it may have been a ghost. After telling my family, my older brother came up with some bullshit story to scare me. I don't remember the story exactly, but it was something about someone dying. He was basically trying to convince me that there was a ghost and that it was going to come after me. And while I believed him, this wasn't the first time he had made stuff up to scare me, so I was a little suspicious. But rather than coming to the conclusion that this was all made up and that the TV was some strange yet natural occurrence, rather than a supernatural one, I came to the conclusion that there was a ghost, but maybe that it was friendly, like my very own Casper the Friendly Ghost to pal around with. As you can probably guess, I didn't have a lot of friends back then. Not that I have a lot of friends now either, but anyway. A couple of years later, the TV did the same thing, only this time I was in the room the whole time. As I was sitting in my room doing homework, the TV suddenly turned on, so I got up to go turn it off, and as I walked over, it shut off, almost as if it knew exactly when I was reaching over to the off button. Later that day, when I went to go watch the TV, I realized that the batteries in the remote were dead. However, we didn't have any spare batteries in the house, so it took a few days before my mom got me more. In the meantime, I was stuck with the dead remote, and throughout the course of several days, the TV turned on and off at least a few times a day. It took about 2 or 3 days before I decided to pull the old batteries out of the remote, but once I did, the TV stopped turning on and off randomly. And I left it that way for about a day, and then just to make sure, the next day I put the batteries back in, and almost immediately the TV turned back on, and then about a minute or so later turned back off. Now, I don't remember well enough to say for sure that the first time this happened, the batteries were also dead, but I think it's a fairly decent possibility, and if we use Occam's razor, we can see that this possibility is far more likely than that some remnants of a dead person are floating around, turning on and off my TV, but only when the batteries are in the remote. My own experience of a strange event with a natural cause doesn't disprove the paranormal. After all, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but lack of evidence can be quite telling when we should expect to find it. For example, I don't have a dog, so I think it's safe to say that there isn't a dog in my apartment. But what evidence do I have for that? None, except for the fact that I didn't let a dog inside, nor do I see, hear, or smell a dog. That doesn't guarantee that some psychopath isn't hiding in the crawl space with a very tame and well-trained canine companion, but there isn't any evidence, nor is there reason to believe this claim that I just made up. And since there are virtually an infinite number of claims that can be made, then without evidence to back up a claim, we don't have anything at all, and therefore we don't have any reason to believe that claim. This brings me to a story I found recently about a photo that was taken on a recently purchased plot of land. The grainy photo shows a girl sort of marching playfully through the woods. The owner of the land contacted the police so that they could alert the family, I guess, but then for some reason, at some point, someone decided this couldn't be a picture of a person, it must be a spooky ghost. But it didn't take long for someone to contact the police chief and tell him that this was his granddaughter, and they were hiking through the woods in the area around the time of the photo. But no matter how many times stories like this get debunked, people keep believing them, and the news keeps reporting them, as if they have ever been anything more than a hoax or a simple mistake. Most everyone is walking around with cameras in their pocket. This isn't proof of anything, but why did we have crappy, inconclusive photos when cameras were much worse? And now that we have the ability to take much clearer images, we get almost no ghost photos, and the ones we do get are found to be fake. Because of this, I think it's reasonable to conclude that all the old ones were fake too. Not necessarily hoaxes, but just images that somebody assumed was a ghost when really it was just a mess up with a camera or something like that. That doesn't conclusively mean ghosts are not real, since maybe it's just impossible to catch one on camera, but that still leaves us with no evidence, and therefore no reason to believe. I think for most people it's just hard to accept because the existence of ghosts validates their belief in the afterlife, and most people want to know that there's something else after they die. They want to be able to see and hold their loved ones again rather than it just being the end. So they want this belief to be true so that they can feel more reassured that they'll live on after death. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it so. It seems to me that if we live in a universe without a god, then we have no reason to think the universe isn't made up entirely of natural processes. This means if ghosts are real, they would be a product of nature. And if that's true, then we should be able to use the scientific method to test the claim about ghosts. or at least be able to find some scientific evidence for them. This would leave us with the question of what are ghosts anyway? I've heard people claim that it is the energy of dead humans, but that's not how energy works. The energy in our bodies, at least as far as we can tell from measuring, comes from entirely natural processes. Of course, that doesn't mean that a supernatural energy doesn't exist undetected by science, but if that's the case, where's the evidence for it? The energy we can measure comes from the food we eat, and once we die, it seems that all that energy gets cycled back through the natural world, just as it had been all along. Bacteria and other organisms break down and absorb nutrients from the decay, and thus disperse the energy that was once used to keep us alive. So if ghosts existed, they would have to be something else entirely. On the other hand, if we live in a universe with a god, then it seems to me that ghosts would imply that God is not omnipotent. If God has a plan for everyone and decides when it's your time to go, but you can stop that and just hang around Earth, then it would seem that God isn't all-powerful. Of course, some will disagree by saying God's plan is too complex and therefore I can't comprehend it. And while I think this is a cop-out, the fact is I can't disprove the concept of ghosts. But as I've said before, without evidence, we don't have any reason to believe, and I don't see anything that we can consider evidence. But if the time comes when such evidence becomes available, I'll gladly change my mind on this topic. Until then, I'm going to remain skeptical. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of this video by leaving a comment. Oh no. Oh shit!